Thank you all for being here. For those that don't know me, my name is Tom Malingo. I am one of the co-founders, along with my lovely wife Susan Bryanton of Brandjectory. I will introduce Brian in just a moment. We first, I would just want to tell you a little bit about Brandjectory for those who don't know us. So I see many of our friends on the call here. Brandjectory is a platform for brands under 10 million in sales, CPG brands, the kinds that would be found at Whole Foods and Sprouts, whether they be food, beverage, health, wellness, supplements, vitamins, alcohol, non-alcohol, frozen, fresh, pet. We include intimate care, personal care, beauty, household. It's on the shelves at Sprouts or Whole Foods or natural grocers or any specialty store in your town. Can be on Brandjectory. And what we try to do is provide exposure, education and engagement with the CPG community through education, as I mentioned, an extensive knowledge base, all written from the perspective of CPG, providing a series of monthly virtual meetings where we bring in folks like Brian, who we'll talk about in a moment, and all of the best CPG experts and investors in the industry who host practice pitch sessions, expert problem solving sessions, lab sessions on fundraising, trade spend, legal. There's a series of 6, 7 monthly meetings, including a monthly founder investor meetup where CPG investors will discuss, you know, an important topic that every founder needs to know. And then we will break into small rooms for one-on-one. And all of those meetings, the wonderful thing is, there's people that want to continue the conversation and learn more from each other. And we're always excited to do that. Everything we do is designed to give brands, young brands, emerging brands, the opportunity to move forward in the industry, connect with the best people, learn from the best people, get educated and get information from the best people. We like to consider ourselves the lifetime of your brand accelerator. We can do some special warm handoffs for brands that, are raising money and that we think the investors will like. And you can read all about what we do at a very fair price on our website, www.brandjectorynow.com. And that's all I'm going to do to bore you right now. I want to get it over to Brian, who has much to say. And we're excited to have Brian here. He brings with him I hope I'm not making it too long, a 40-year career in food and distribution and brokerage. He's now working more closely with emerging brands, and we're excited to hear from him because we know that whether it's a broker, a distributor, whether you're trying to get into stores using brokers and distributors, how you're functioning, how you're doing those things, the relationships you have, they're very important. Sometimes they can be very confusing. They can be costly, and you want to know what the results are going to be. And we look to someone like Brian, who has that experience, to really talk about for us today. And he'll explain his background and a little of what he does for Beckett Industries. But we're excited to have someone like Brian who can really show us and talk to us and tell us about what it is you need to be aware of, how you need to function, how you need to work with brokers and distributors, and what you can do to always enhance that relationship. Please put your Q&A in the chat or in the Q&A section. We are recording this session, so everyone on the call and everyone who registered will get a recording of it. We'll hear from Brian for the next 35 minutes, and we'll leave time at end for all those Q&As that come in. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian. And Brian, please take the show. And if you need anything, put it in the chat, and we'll be quick to respond.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate the time, and I know everyone's time is valuable, so I hope this will be worthwhile. I've been in the industry, actually it's been 50 years, but who's counting? It just shows how old I am, Tom, at this point. But I know there's various degrees of brand level in this. So, there's been some that have been in for a short time, some in for a long time. So some of this may be repetitive to you and some of it may not, but I always feel like there's things I can learn every day, and I try to learn something new. And there's always something to learn in this industry. So hopefully you'll be able to glean something out of this as we go. I will try, Tom, give me a cue when we're getting close, because I do want to leave time for questions and not just be talking during this. And I also wanted to tell you that, if there is some follow-up that's particular to you after this, I am open to chatting individually if someone wants to reach out. I think one thing great about our industry is there's so many people willing to help out without a price tag to it in this industry. I've found that throughout my time in this industry, and I try to give back the same way. So if there is follow-ups that can't be answered on here, I'm happy to jump in and talk to some people individually.
And anyone who needs Brian's contact information can just reach out to me.
Okay. So a little bit about my background. The 50 years is a little bit, maybe cheating a little bit, but I always tell people before Amazon existed, I was delivering groceries in my red wagon before child labor laws at 12 years old. So that's how long I've been in the industry. I spent the first part of my career in the retail grocery side and actually managed stores in my mid to late 20s, early 30s. And then I moved on to the distributor side of the business before KE and Unify purchased everybody. There was a lot of regional distributors, and I worked 17 years for a pretty strong regional Midwest distributor, which was originally Milwaukee Biscuit Company, and then it turned into MBC Foods as we moved beyond cookies and into specialty at that time. So I became VP of sales there, and then eventually we were sold to KE. My friend and former, it will be later my partner in my business, was CEO, and he ended up becoming VP of sales at KE. I moved on to the manufacturing side. I worked for 8 years for Manischewitz, the kosher food company, to get my feet kind of stepping into sales. And then I kind of went to where my passion was, which was emerging brands. And I became kind of like a VP of sales for hire for startups. And some of the brands that I worked for, Benito's, Lucy's Cookies. I spent some time with Vita Coco Coconut Water. And then about 15 years ago, I mentioned my former partner in the business we went into, Fred Neubauer. We started a business called FDM. And at that time, the brokers were also being gobbled up in the industry. So we thought there was a gap for emerging brands that they weren't getting represented like they should because of the regional distributors or the regional brokers were getting acquired by the larger brokers. So we started FDM as an emerging brands outsource sales. There was 4 of us when we started that. We ended up growing to 50 when I finally left. And of course, 4 years ago, we got acquired by one of those large brokers. They made us an offer we couldn't refuse. And so Advantage Sales purchased us 4 years ago. We had a 3-year contract, which I served out a little over that, 3.5 years. I wasn't forced out, but I figured it was the right time in November of last year. And unfortunately, my partner had passed away a couple years ago in the middle of that contract, so we never got to fulfill that. But so I left in November, and I retired for about 2 minutes, and then Beckett Industries. I had not been involved in the investment side before, and I thought this was very interesting to get into the investment side. And of course, they had money and wanted to do investments, and I have the CPG experience of working with brands like yourself. So that was the reason for doing that. So for me, at 66, it was a great way for me to do something I hadn't done before and to use the experience I've had in the industry. So I'm excited for it. I'm certainly enjoying it so far in the 3 or 4 months. To be honest with you, I didn't know a Series A from a Series B when I started this, but that's not what they brought me in for. And I guess what you'll get from me on this is that you'll get a guy that was on that side of the business, courting people like you on the sales side, having to work for a distributor. I actually worked 1 year, about 20 years ago, as a category manager for KE, so I even have that background. But you'll get someone who's now had those hats and now is not wearing those hats. So anything you get from me will be based on experience and truth, and not someone trying to sell you something, which is interesting. So it was really fun to do this, by the way. And when Tom asked me, because I had all of these thoughts in my head, but I hadn't really put them on a paper or a PowerPoint before. So it kind of helped me remember some of the things that I had learned. So I will now get into these. And again, like I said, we'll have some time at the end of this to ask questions. I may end up going through these kind of fast. And some of them, like you said, probably involve some more in-depth conversations, but we have 30 minutes. So I'll do the best I can at getting through these. So I thought having a history, and some of you probably know this history, but having the history of what's happened in the industry is really important to know that, to take us to where we are today and why we have some of the issues and why you probably run into some of these issues in while you're search with distributors and brokers and those type of things. So if you look at, and again, I might not have these years approximately right, but they're close. So if you look at distributors before 1990, most distributors were regional full service distributors, which meant they were working on a cost plus 25 to 30 basis. They were actually sales organizations. Now I know KE and Unify both claim to be sales organizations, but that's probably really not the case anymore. They're mostly logistics, and there's an economic factor to that. So at that time, there was no cost plus contracts with these retailers for the most part. So the distributors actually went out and sold. There was also a lot more you could do at that time because there wasn't as many, the global acquiring of all the retail chains wasn't out there. So there was much more a distributor could do at store level, at a regional level than there was in this day and age, even though there's still some of that, but not where it was prior to 1990. So at that time, there was a lot more collaboration between you, the vendors, and the distributors. It was more of a partnership and working together. And it probably felt more like that at that time too, having been a part of that. And again, as I mentioned, there was a lot more small regional chains that could do things more individually. There was more reasons for distributors to be sales oriented at that time. UNFI became pretty much the first national distributor that focused on natural as natural was emerging. But even UNFI at that time, they were very regional based. There was a long time before like UNFI East and West were even using the same systems, if they even are still today. I know if you go back a few years ago, they still weren't even intermingled the way they should as far as their processing goes. I think that's changed now. And then, of course, the emergence of Tree of Life as a national distributor. They were probably, if you guys recall the name Tree of Life, they were one of the major national distributors at the time. They also ended up getting acquired by KE during that. And at that time, KE was just a regional distributor. I mean, nobody thought KE was going to be the winner of the distributor wars. There was a couple of groups out of Holland that owned a lot of the regional distributors at that time. And it just turned out KE, and you have to give them a lot of credit for this, ended up becoming one of those, it ended up becoming one of the national distributors along with UNFI at that time. So at that time, there became a lot of cost plus at that time. And most of you are familiar with that term where UNFI has a contract with Whole Foods at a cost plus 8. KE has a contract with Sprouts at a cost plus 8. And a lot of those cost plus ranged into between the 8 and 12%. So at that time for you, it probably seemed like a much better deal because now your costs were going to go down. Instead of having a 25% to 30% margin from the distributor, you're now down to an 8 to 12% margin. But the problem with that, as those bidding wars between the distributors and retailers went on, it also it really created problems for those distributors to be profitable. So the end result becomes that these distributors now have to cut overhead and charge and find ways. So part of that was the service aspect of that. That's where the distributors became less sales orientated, and they ended up having to cut that manpower in the stores in order to do that. So that if you're signing up with a distributor and thinking you're going to get a sales force, which I know a lot of people do, you're really not. They're there as logistics and to get the product from A to B, even though that's not what they're telling you. So that's where a lot of this became a big problem for people like you. And also, the other thing that it did is that the distributors had to find other ways to make up for those very competitive contracts they were signing. So a lot of those MCB deductions that you get and programs that you get from the UNFI and KE were there to help create a profit center for the distributors because of those contracts they got into. Sorry. So the broker industry was what kind of followed a similar pattern, to be honest with you. There was a lot of regional brokers at the time. There was a lot of regional distributors. I think the brokers and the vendors became partners in a lot of cases. And most of the time at that time, if you had a relationship and you date back to those days, you'll remember having a relationship with the owners of those brokers. They were smaller, relationship driven. And I think at that time there was a lot more collaboration between the brokers before the brokers started getting acquired by these large groups out there. So it really did follow a very similar pattern in that the brokers started to get acquiring, and these super brokers emerged like Presence, Advantage, Acosta, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with them. Now, those larger brokers at that point in time also became very profit driven. So emerging brands kind of got left out on the side because obviously they were more interested in the brands that could produce the most revenue. And if you were a small brand and started working with these, you got very little attention. I mean, if you think about who are you going to give attention to, the Kind Bars of the world or another small brand, a bar brand going into that category. So that became the other problem. So the strong regional brokers that would go out and you could work with and you could associate with the sales team kind of went away at that point in time. Now there are still some out there. You just have to search and be a little bit more diligent in that. But and I do think everything goes in circles, in full circles. So I do think I'm seeing more and more of this come back. After I left the FDM in November, I started reaching out to a lot of those that I had heard of. And it's nice to see that there are still some out there. You just have to be diligent in your search for them. So managing a distributor, if most of you have seen the pitfalls of this, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. The distributors, I don't know if it's intentional, but a lot of times, again, they're large organizations that are managed very top heavy down and also pretty high turnover. So you are going to get distributor reps and people that you work with that are really good at their job. And then there's others that are not so good at it. And a lot of times you've seen some of this. So, most retailers, about 90% have a contract with either KE or UNFI. So I know a lot of times I would get vendors coming to me or new clients that would say, "Hey, I would prefer not to work with KE or UNFI." Well, at the end of the day, you really don't have a choice because they've signed that contract as the preferred distributor. So you really don't have a choice but to use one of them. Now, there are certainly regionals that you can get your way around, but in long term, if you want to grow your brand like most do to want to sell the brand, you are going to have to figure out a way to work with these two distributors in most grocery categories anyway. And I think most of you probably realize that. Also, there are some advantages because of those cost plus, because working with the smaller distributors who are not at that cost plus, you're going to have a higher retail price on the shelf also. The labor situation that's in the US right now has also created an issue with that. There's been some startup distributors that have tried to affect KE and UNFI, but the labor costs at retail have also created some havoc with that because the retailers are having the same problem with finding good employees or finding enough employees. And if you ask those employees to try to do other things than what they're used to, the chances are you're going to get missed. So when 80% of your products are coming through one distributor, it's much easier for that employee to go into the store and order that product. If you're with someone else that's smaller, there's a good chance you may have an empty shelf because you're now working with that distributor, unless they actually have people going into the stores ordering it for them. I've also heard the argument, and a lot of times I will get, I always got, at least on the FDM side, people coming to me and say, "Hey, I'd rather go direct." Well, I think there still is a goal to going direct, but again, with those cost plus, it's not as much of an advantage to go direct other than ridding yourself of some of those distributor charges. And also, I think the other piece of that that's probably even more important is if you go direct into a wholesale warehouse, there is slotting that's involved in that, and usually pretty high slotting. And also, if the turn rate is expected. So if you're trying to compete against Skippy peanut butter or Miracle Whip for turn rate, most items in the emerging brand space aren't going to be able to compete with that. So that's the reason why the retailers use them in the first place, is because they know that they're not going to make it in the warehouse. And the other obstacle to that is, let's say you have 6 items in your portfolio, and 2 of them do really well. Well, you don't want to have those other 4 through the distributor while 2 are direct, because they're not maintaining what they need to in those direct warehouses. So there are issues when it comes to either going direct or distributor. I think once a line is more matured, there's opportunities to go there, but certainly initially it may not be the best bet for you. So I guess the end result of this is that, like I said, probably 90% of the brands are going to have to figure out a way to use UNFI or KE. And then I guess the question is, what's the best way to do that? The distributor programs, I think I mentioned this briefly, and most of you who have been involved with it know it. Most of those distributor programs are not a benefit for you. You can do the ROI. I've done it for years. 9 times out of 10, the math doesn't work out. Those programs are there to generate income for the distributors, and most of the time they do not do a lot to help you. I get it's a little bit of a game, because if you're a new vendor going into UNFI or KE, they put certain pressures on you to do some of those programs. So you almost have to kind of pay to play. So there is some of that happens with that. And I'll go through a little bit about like maybe ways around that in the next couple of slides. So managing a distributor, and this kind of goes into that, and I hope you can read all of these bullet points, but I think Tom will probably send you this presentation afterwards if you can't. But
Yes, we will.
there is always the question of, what should I do, OI, MCB, or a scan? And obviously, the number one, if you can do a scan at any retailer, it is the best way to do it for lots of reasons. Number one, you're only paying for what goes through the register. So, if you're giving whatever that is away, let's say it's 50 cents, you're only paying it if that product actually sells through the cash register. And MCB, of course, can be only what goes into the store. But then, as most of you know, that is also, there's charges tacked on from the distributor for processing. There's also many distributors charge a minimum for MCBs. So they'll charge a minimum fee to run an MCB. So for instance, you didn't have a very good results with a small retailer, and let's say you sold, your total MCB came to $100. And now KE or UNFI is charging you $50 to run the MCB. Not a very good spend at all. And then, of course, the other part of that is the OIs. So OIs, most distributors are going to ask you for 4. I don't think I would give a distributor 4 unless I absolutely had to, because of the buy-in windows. As you know, most of those distributors have 6 to 8 week buy-in windows. So it may be a 4-week OI at retail, but you're basically giving that OI for 6 to 8 weeks. Now you multiply that if you give them 4 of them, and all of a sudden your product is on sale for half the year. Probably not a very good spend. Now the benefit of OI is that it's coming off invoice, and so it's not based on the distributor price to the retailer. So there's the savings there versus giving an MCB. But also a reminder that if you don't give at least 15%, the retailers tend not to pass it on. And even sometimes then, retailers have their own philosophy on that. So they'll come back and say, well, if it isn't 20%, I'm not passing it on. So then you end up having to give a scan or an MCB on top of the OI anyway. So the end result in all of this is that if there is a way to do a scan directly through the retailer for whatever their requirements is for that, or whatever price point you want to hit, that is the best way to do it. Anything else that you have to do you should only do unless there is no way to do it. Some retailers don't accept scans. Some need an OI plus a scan in order to do it. But I think many of the retailers today still allow the scans, and it's the best way to do it, if at all possible, without involving the distributor at all. As far as the hidden charges and how to best manage it, I'm sure some of you have been through this in the past, but you really need someone on your team or a third party that can manage this for you. I know at FDM, um, because of my 1 year experience at KE, when we initially started, guess who got to be the distributor person? It was me. And it's a lot to manage. And I quickly learned as we grew that I was going to hire someone from within those distributors in order to manage that business. So at FDM, we hired several people from UNFI and KE. Who knows how to better negotiate and manage that than someone that's already been at that level? But there are certainly brokers out there that can do that also. But anyone, any sales agency, outsource sales, whatever it might be, whether you're doing it internally, really needs to have some distributor background to know how to manage and work with UNFI and KE. And the other thing I want to point out to you is when you're working with a broker, if you're working with a broker rep that their responsibility is KE, guess who they view the client as? They view the client as KE. They've got to work with them on a daily basis, and they're going to make sure that those people like them. And so, even though they represent you, they also represent KE, and a lot of times they're not going to want to hurt those relationships for you. So you need to have someone within your organization that kind of understands that too, or another third party. And there are getting to be more and more of those out there that will just help you manage that Unify and KE piece of the business. But you need to have someone do that. Now, I will also say that most brokers don't have someone that does line by line deductions. And as you know, Unify and KE code all of those deductions. So most of the time you don't understand them. Certainly, there are some third-party agencies out there that know how to do that. And by the way, you'll see at the end of this deck, I put some partners out there that I vetted and worked with in the past, or others have. Some of these are deduction management. Some of these are brokers that I've worked with and vetted. And so I asked some of those to put one pagers together for me. Now I will quantitate that not everyone is right depending on what stage you're at. And so, I will briefly go through those if we have time. So, my goal on this was to give you some options, and that's not all the options, but if you're looking, these are ones that I know either I've worked with or others have worked with in the past. But internally, at some point in time, you're going to need to bring somebody in that can help go through these deductions. And certainly now with AI out there, I have seen some good results and some good feedback that AI is working pretty good on these deductions. I will tell you that the squeaky wheel gets so far gets the most money back on these. If KE or Unify, both KE and Unify have their terms net 10, 30, whatever it is, and you can pay them. They can pay you in 30 and they'll still take the 10 days. And by the way, if you never ask for your money back, they'll never give it back. So where I'm going with this, if you have somebody that constantly is saying, hey, okay, you don't deserve this deduction, here's why, or Unify, eventually they'll quit taking it. So having somebody to go through those and dispute those is going to be important, whether it's external or internal to go through those. But if you don't do anything, they will keep taking them and you'll keep hurting your bottom line. Opening distributor warehouses is always another important thing with distributors. Years ago, the method was when you first got a new product out, you went to Unify and KE and opened up warehouses. That was, you wanted to get those two distributors aboard. The problem with that is you really had nothing to base that on. So they were really calling the shots when it came to that. So they would say, we want 4 OIs a year. We want you to participate in all these programs. If you do that, we'll take you on. My philosophy over the last 5 years completely flipped on this. It's completely retail driven. So you really need to bring on a retailer. If I still manage Sprouts at the end of my FDM thing. If you bring in Sprouts, it's KE's #1 customer. Guess what? Sprouts tells KE to set it up, it's set up. You don't have to play any of those games. If Unify tells Whole Foods they want your product, they will open it up. There's also cost to opening those warehouses, as most of you know. And by the way, if you get the product in those warehouses and it doesn't meet the minimum movement, you get discontinued after 6 months. So another reason to make that more retail driven. Now, if you don't have the access to larger chains within those warehouses, then you need a sales representation or brokers or outsource sales or whatever it is to go in and really try to drive sales in those warehouses to get the sales up. But it has to be managed. You have to watch it because all of a sudden you're spending a lot of money to open warehouses, and 6 months later, it's not meeting the minimum threshold, and you lose that. The last big point I had on that opening warehouses is delivered versus FOB. This one to me is like one of the biggest shames we have in the industry right now because KE and Unify are basically logistic companies, but for whatever reason, they don't do it very well anymore. Most of you have had those issues with it, and they're also using their own service to make a profit. So if they pick up from you, if you're at a cost, whatever, let's say your cost is $1, and you're selling to a retailer like Sprouts. I keep using Sprouts because I called on them for years. But so you're Sprouts. You tell Sprouts your cost is $1. Sprouts goes back and says, okay, you'll be $1.49 at retail here. If you tell Sprouts that KE is picking up, they shake their heads and go, yeah, I don't know. I'll have to wait and see what my cost is from KE because KE will tack margin on, and so will UNFI. So they're using the freight for profit center. So unfortunately, and I tell just about every vendor that if you aren't delivered now, and some people just don't have the capability of doing it, you're going to be before we're done because you're going to find out that it just doesn't work for a lot of different reasons. So I would certainly encourage everybody if they have the ability to go delivered. And I would especially recommend this in the perishable side, frozen and dairy, which has become even more of a nightmare. But again, I know it's something extra for you to have to do when you're small and you don't have the capacity to do it. But I can tell you, eventually you probably will have to do it unless something gets fixed sometime before I die, because I haven't seen it yet. It is a problem. Using brokers to help manage warehouse and inventory and logistics is really important. I just mentioned to you that certainly since COVID, this has gotten much worse. And brokers can really help you manage to make sure that you're in stock on things and that things are moving. Both Unify and KE have portals, and they should be used. And that's one thing, those portals, by the way, you're paying 2% for those portals, so you might as well use it, and you don't have a choice in that. So your broker should be helping you to manage those inventory levels so you're not running out of stock in warehouses where you have products, which I'm sure you all know is a very common thing also. And again, new retailer rollouts can be tracked through that, as I mentioned. And again, if you're utilizing a broker, the brokers, if they can't do this or won't do that, then you might want to find another broker. So now turning my attention towards brokers, where I came from. And by the way, we called ourselves outsource sales. So which again, it's a different where we felt we differentiated as outsource sales is we had a staff that was we felt was more reflective of working with the client. We always said that we don't feel like we're working for the particular retailer because when we were smaller, we used to have to outsource to other brokers also, and I used to see it. It would be the same relationship-driven piece that I talked to you about with distributors. But again, if you have a large broker that has 6 people at Sprouts, for instance, guess who they feel their relationship is going to be? Do you think they're going to want to negotiate your slotting down and irritate the retailer? No, they're probably, I used to see it over and over where I had to be the one that asked and not them because they didn't want to jeopardize that relationship. So it is something to remember no matter what broker you're with. Don't take it for granted that they're probably going to do the right thing for you because again, they're going to want to do the thing that puts them in the best stance with that category manager. Again, that's not everybody for sure, but that is the majority of most of the broker reps that I've worked with in the past. that you're really going to want to watch that. And whether outsourced sales or brokers or regional brokers, I think you have to look at it as depending on what your goals and priorities are. So, everyone has a different path to where they want to be. And I think picking the right group of brokers or outsourced sales for you is really important. Questions to consider when you're doing this: a retainer versus commission and what the ROI is. I've heard a lot of clients over the years on the FDM side that said they didn't like paying retainers, but I will tell you, you do sometimes get what you pay for. And a broker that says they don't charge retainer ever, you might want to like take a look at how good they are, because the brokers that are in demand, they're in demand for a reason, and there's a reason why they can charge a retainer because of that. And a broker that may not be as good, just looking to sign anybody they can for as long as they can, may not charge that retainer. Now, again, I'm not saying that in all cases, but I'm saying it is something to consider, and not always look at that retainer word as something negative. I also would point out to you that if you were to go out and hire somebody and and go the route of, well, I'm going to hire a regional manager instead of using brokers, which some organizations get to that, but there's a cost to doing that also. So if you were going to do that, that is basically the same as paid a retainer, because you've got a cost going into whatever that resource is, plus benefits, plus everything else that you're paying. So you're not expecting that person ROI in the first 6 months to actually look good either, right? It's going to take that person some time to make contacts, to make sales, all the stuff that goes into selling. So it's something to consider when you're looking at brokers or outsourced sales. The retainer word shouldn't always be negative, but it also should be measured too. So I mentioned the retailer relationships before in this, and I think when you're interviewing brokers, especially if you're looking at whatever your goals are, whatever your particular retailers are, that when you're interviewing those brokers, to make sure they understand the retailer. If they can't tell you what works best for that particular retailer, if they can't tell you what the programs are, or how a particular category manager that your category is in, how he looks at that category, you may not have the right broker. They should be able to answer those questions for you, and if they can't, then you may want to shop around a little bit until you do. I would also say when you're interviewing, ask to talk to the account people. Talk to the people that are actually out there. I always used to give access to my people for that. And I would say have a conversation with the person that's doing HEB or Kroger, whoever it is, and have that discussion. And if they won't let you do that, then again, that might be another red flag. Brand referrals. Everybody asks for brand referrals. Not a bad thought, but guess what, guys? I'm probably not going to give you a referral for someone that isn't going to say good things about me. But I will tell you, at least at FDM, I used to tell the brands that were willing to be a referral for us, go ahead and tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly, because they're going to find it out within 6 months anyway. And nobody's perfect. But I do think it is good to talk to brands and understand what the broker's strengths and weaknesses are. And again, I think all brokers should be willing to allow you to do that. If they don't, again, another red flag. And again, I mentioned to have contact with some of the personnel, not just management, because at the end of the day, the people in the street are going to be the one that you have to work with the most. One of the other bullets on here that I thought was important is communication with the sales force. There is a lot of larger brokers that try to shelter you with brand managers and don't like you to talk to the sales force. I think that is another red flag, and it's something we didn't live by. You should be able to talk to the people that are representing you. Now, I get it; they're representing a lot of lines, so you have to be thoughtful on how you do that, which means not contacting them every day, which can get annoying. But you do want to be the squeaky wheel. It is human nature, having been in that position myself, that if you're somebody that doesn't to reach out to me but once a month, I might forget about you. So you want to be the guy that's the squeaky wheel, but not the. I used to put this way: not not the nails on the chalkboard type person. You don't want to be that guy either, because you want to listen. There is a word in the industry called broker beaters, which I had as a bullet here at a third point. You don't want to be the broker beater, and I realize that's a philosophy with some people, by the way. You don't want to be the guy that when the broker gets a win for you, they feel badly because they hate you so much because of the way you've beat them up. You can get a lot further being nice. When I say nice, you be nice with accountability. I think that's probably the best word for it. But you want to be able to collaborate with the brokers and work with them. A couple other things to look at. Can the broker give you a forecast? Like if you're asking, and don't ask for a 5-year forecast because nobody can do that, but they should be able to go out a year or two and say, okay, this is my brand. This is what my goals are. What retailers, where do you think we can get? We're year one, where can we get in year two? And they should be able to do that. And again, forecasts are difficult because you never know what retailers are going to do, but you should be able to put something together that's reasonable out of that. The review calendars, everyone should be able to provide you with review calendars. When is my reset? When is the review coming? When am I going to be on shelf if we do get on? And I know one of our cardinal rules at FDM is you can't miss a review. There's nothing worse than missing a review. And it happens, it slips, but boy, it's got to be the exception and not the rule. And then data. One of the big advantages when we sold to Advantage was the access to data. And most of you know how expensive, especially as an emerging brand, data is. And most of you have to scrape and do whatever you can to try to get that data when you're an emerging brand. Some of the larger brokers, and we had that access at FDM, if you were on with us with the retainer, we could get that. We had Spins, Nielsen, and Circana. So that is something to consider, especially when you know what that cost is of getting that data to be able to have access to that. And another thing to remember with data, there is limitations with data for any third party. And any third party that doesn't adhere to those at those rules that like Spins has can lose their contract in a hurry. And if someone's doing it on the side, God bless them, but I wouldn't want to be caught doing that because you don't want to lose access to that data. Also, the competitive brand piece is also important. So I don't think there's anything wrong with asking like what else you have in this category. But I would point out something to you, unless it's a direct competitor, like I always used to say in the ice cream category, for instance, or confectionery, like you don't want a broker not to have anything in those categories because that means they're not in front of those category managers or they're not important to them. So, for instance, if you got an ice cream that's coconut based, who cares if that broker has a dairy based ice cream? I realize it's the same category, but it's not in the same subcategory. So I don't think necessarily, being the only brand in a category is a good thing. And I guess, some of the big brands, when they get to the point where they're producing so much revenue, they can demand that. You'll know it already because the broker won't be able to talk to you in the first place. But I look at that competitive brand thing a little bit differently than some do when they come in, and I know that question always comes up. Couple more things on managing the brokers. Tom, how am I doing on time, by the way?
Let's keep going. This is good information and I wanted to get out. So please keep going, Brian.
Okay. So I don't know if anyone knows what I mean by the 20-60-20 rule. It's kind of one of those that if anyone did a business class on what most organizations look like, that means 20% of your people are stars, 60% are somewhere in between, and 20% probably shouldn't be there. And most organizations have that. Anyone who's had to manage anybody before knows that the 60% is where you turn your attention because you want to get them into that 20%. And the ones that don't make it into that 20% end up in the bottom 20%. Eventually, they become history. I mean, that's the way it should be. So there's always going to be turnover. certainly the one thing I don't miss about running a company anymore is managing people, because it hasn't gotten any easier, and I'm still a little old school when it comes to managing people, which wasn't real popular anymore. But I always thought I was fair, but it's not. Managing people is a difficult thing. But remember, my point is, remember that when you're working with firms, you're not going to have everybody at any sales organization that's going to have all superstars. So it means you're going to take a little work with those people that fall into that 60%. And then the ones that are on the 20%, you got to let whoever is in charge know. And eventually those people should not be there. And if they stay there, then you got another problem, because then you've got an organization that's afraid to move on from people. And that's part of any, no matter who you're with, that's something that you have to be able to do. Again, I talked about being the squeaky wheel, but not the nails on the chalkboard. I think that's a really important point. And I would say the question always comes up, like, how do you manage a broker? And I would say you need a point person within your organization to work with a broker. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be the VP of sales. It has to be someone that knows how to work, can roll their sleeves up a little bit, is willing to work with the broker, and help them to get to where they need to go. But also, there's that accountability piece in there too. Expectations on a broker. Listen, most brokers, and I fell in this category when I used to do a lot of retail myself. If I had somebody that was always willing to do every presentation and said, "Hey, I'll fill out that paperwork," God bless them. I wouldn't argue with them. I would let them do it. But you have to be able to push back and say, "That's your job. Sorry, you need to do that." Or, guess what? You'll be doing it all the time for everybody. I mean, a broker should be able to do that paperwork, provide the paperwork, provide a recap of what's going on with a promotion, do all of those type of things that you would expect a broker to do. If you have to ask for that too much, again, you may have the wrong broker. So, but you have to set those expectations right away. Communication is always important. We always had a 24-hour rule at FDM. And I can tell you that I lived by that rule myself, and the leaders should live by it also. Now, I always told my people that a 24-hour rule does not mean you have to have an answer to a client. But I said, listen, if I was your boss and you didn't answer me within 24 hours, and by the way, all those clients are your bosses, you would have a problem. So you can tell somebody, "Hey, I'm traveling. I've got this. I will get back to you by next Monday." That's fair, but then they better get back to you by next Monday. So that's what I mean by a 24-hour rule. And that's what I mean by communication. There has to be accountability there. And again, not everybody is great at being able to organize themselves. So again, you may get somebody that never gets back to you. By the way, that's not your problem. That's whoever's leading that broker group. You need to let them know if you have a problem with that. And if it becomes whoever the broker is, if that is kind of the MO for the broker, then you may have the wrong broker. Some brokers are good farmers, and some brokers are good at planting the seed. And what I mean by that is some brokers are going out and getting the wins. And getting on the shelf is one thing. Staying on the shelf is another. Very costly for anybody to get on the shelf, with the slotting, the spend that you have to do to stay on the shelf in the first year is usually very high. To do all that and then lose that distribution is devastating for most brands. So once you're on the shelf, that's where that broker becomes even more important, to let you know how you're doing. The time to find out you're not doing well is not 3 months before you get discontinued or you're in trouble because it's too late to fix it then. I always felt like if I let a client know we're having an issue and they don't do anything, that's on them. Or if we do everything to fix it and it still doesn't work, then maybe it's just the wrong retailer. But you need to be able to react to if things aren't going well and be able to fix that. And really that is, that is where some brokers are good at one and not the other. You kind of need a broker that does both of those and can do them well. Business reviews are always important to schedule with brokers. I think, a lot of times that doesn't happen, but I always felt really great about getting done with a business review and going through, okay, what have we gained this year? What goals did we have to start the year? Did we hit them? Did we not hit them, and why? And then set the goals for the previous years. So if you're not doing at least an annual review and then a 6 month check-in, I would definitely start doing that right now. Um, Retailer review expectations. You can't do a good review 2 days before the review starts. So some brokers wait too long for that. Now, I will quantify that by saying some retailers don't give you any notice. It happens where Kroger comes out and said, "I got to have this in a week." Those are circumstances you can't do anything about. But for the most part, you need time to prepare, develop a strategy, what going in. And I think, you get usually one chance at that a year, maybe two, depending on the category. And as you know, it's gotten more and more difficult to get appointments at retail levels. And it's so, sometimes doing those presentations on a PowerPoint, maybe all you get a chance at until you get in front of that broker. So it's that retailer. So you really need to make sure that you do a good job of making sure you got everything you need on that PowerPoint and getting it down right so you have a chance at that live review.
Brian, we are just a couple minutes from the top of the hour. I know there was a lot more you wanted to get through with sharing a little bit about each of the types of vendors that brands could use, and I'd love to get that material. But we are at the top of the hour, and I do want to be respectful of your time and everybody else's. I have one question for you, and again, anybody who has a question, I have Brian at BeckettIndustries.com. That's his email. Tom at Brandjectory.com. I'll make sure your questions get to Brian, so please feel free to email us. Brian, the number one question that I hear from brands, and I think you went to this a little bit, but how long do I give a broker or distributor? Is it 6 months? Is there what's the point where I have to say lost investment, I got to move on? Yeah, I know it's different, but is there some gauge in your head that you say this is when there should be some results, even if it's not break even? You should be seeing the results where you can start to map that break even.
Yeah, that's a great question, Tom, and it came up all the time. And God love my partner, who used to give dollar amounts that probably weren't realistic. I never did that, and here's what I said. I would say, because the question would be, where will I be in sales in 6 months? And I would say, I don't know. It could be nothing. It could be a lot. I don't know, and anyone that tells you to do is lying to you, to be honest with you. But here's what you can measure that by. How many reviews have I been into? How many live meetings have I had with that broker instead of just submissions? Because anybody can submit. So you've got to be able to get in front of those category managers, get your shot at it. And at the end of 6 months, if your major targets, you've had the reviews, you've gotten in front of them, you yourself have presented, and maybe some of those have come through, maybe some of them haven't. The broker's really done their jobs at that point, because I can't make a category manager take anything. No matter how good of relationships I had at Sprouts, and some of them I considered my friends, I still got less than 40% of the items in the store. So you don't know what they're thinking. And as you know, those category managers come and go too many times in the course of a year. But I think you can measure the brokers eventually after a year. It's got to come back to sales, right? It does. But I think during that first 6 months, measure the appointments that you've been getting. And again, if you've already got distribution out there and you've got warehouses open, it's a little bit easier to look at sales and say, this is where, this is the gains that we've made. But if you're brand new and you're entering a market, I would look at it more like, okay, how many appointments have they gotten? How many times have I gotten in front of people? Are they doing the right thing? And you'll get a good sense of that. You'll know. one way or the other. And if it isn't very good, then I would maybe end that relationship.
And
You know,
you can
one of
measure that against what you do, what you normally expect yourself to be able to do, right? I mean, that's always one of the things. If it's more than you can do on your own, things are moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and I guess the other big point of that when you're doing the contracts, I would red flag anybody that wants more than a 60-day notice because that tells me they just want your retainer money for as long as they possibly can.
All right.
I really think a 30-day notice is adequate in most cases, and I get that. But for anyone to ask for more, and I've seen these 90 and longer days notice, longer term notices. Like if you're not doing the job, why should I pay you for another 3 months? And then once you give them the notice, you're in a dead zone for 3 months while you hire another broker too. So that's a big red flag in a contract.
Okay. Well, with that, we are past 1 o'clock here, so I want to, or 1 o'clock my time, 4 o'clock on the East Coast, and I think 3 o'clock where Brian, no, maybe 2 o'clock where Brian is. I'm not real sure, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I want to thank everybody for being here again. Brian at BeckettIndustries.com, Tom at Brandjectory.com, or excuse me, Brian at BeckettIndustries.com, Tom at Brandjectory.com. If you have questions, if you want to connect, we're happy to do that. I will try to look for the questions here and make sure if there's any that are left, I will get to you. And in the meantime, again, check out www.brandjectorynow.com, our website. Maybe we can ask Brian. This was so good, so much information. Maybe we can ask Brian back soon to maybe continue the conversation. I'd love that. And in the meantime, you will all get a recording of this and Brian's slides. So, Brian, anything to finish with?
No, just thank you. I certainly recognize some of the names now that I got off the screen. So hello to those of you who I know. And again, if you want to reach out individually, you have some question on some particular thing, I'll be happy to try to answer it. And again, thanks, Tom, for the invitation. I enjoyed getting in front of everybody and teaching a little bit about what I've known over the years.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Thanks for sharing your experience and history and insights. And we'll all get back together again soon. Take care, everyone. Thank
Thanks.
you.